Okay, we'll start with this. Deontay Wilder versus Dillian Whyte clash opens up following Fury versus AJ deal.
What Fury versus AJ deal?
They didn't reach a deal.
A WBC interim heavyweight title clash between Deontay Wilder and Dillian Whyte has opened up following an agreement between Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua. Wilder and Whyte, linked to a fight for some time, could now clash in 2021 following a two-fight deal between Fury and AJ.
What fucking two-fight deal are they talking about?
It all depends on how the Fury versus Wilder trilogy goes down later this year, and once the current pandemic conditions allow fans back into arenas. Should Fury defeat Wilder for the second time, potentially in December, that puts Joshua firmly in the frame for a summer blockbuster undisputed unification. But where does that leave Wilder? Well, the Bronze Bomber has a high standing with the WBC. He'll certainly be able to lobby for an immediate shot at the interim title that is currently held by Whyte. This means Wilder versus Whyte could be ordered by the World Boxing Council whilst Fury versus Joshua plays out. The winner of Wilder versus Whyte would then become the new mandate for the eventual winner who emerges undisputed from the Fury versus Joshua fight. I'm going to say that this article and what it details is largely speculative. There's no quotes from the WBC in here that indicate that this is a fight they intend to order. The most recent set of comments from the WBC indicate the previous deadline of February 2021, where Dillian Whyte will be eligible to get his title shot. What this article attempts to do is to forecast the environment after the third installment of Wilder versus Fury, provided that Fury wins that fight, and what could become of Deontay Wilder thereafter.
There's no guarantees.
Tell you something, there's no guarantees that Deontay Wilder is going to be in any condition to fight after that third installment. It's just as possible that he decides to call it a career, retires, having never fought Dillian Whyte. This scenario that the people over there at World Boxing News are presenting is not the most outlandish scenario I've ever heard.
It's not.
But it isn't the most likely scenario either. As far as how the scenario sits with me, if it were to happen that way, if it were to come into fruition, yes, I'd relish the opportunity to see Deontay Wilder fight Dillian Whyte under these circumstances. I don't know how Dillian Whyte would feel about it. I don't know how he'd feel about the WBC ordering him to give Deontay Wilder a shot at his interim title when Deontay Wilder himself never gave Whyte a shot at his title. I don't know how Dillian would feel about it, but when I watch this kind of fight, when I tune into this kind of a situation, and I dare say yes, could be a chance for Deontay Wilder to get himself back in the winner's bracket, back in world title contention. For Dillian, I don't know if this qualifies as revenge, as revenge would be not giving Wilder the shot at all, depriving him of a fight altogether, but it would be a chance for Dillian to punch this guy in the face, which I think he still wants, more or less.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine what those press conferences would be like? The build-up leading up to what could be, or what would be, Wilder versus Whyte?
It'd be something to see.
Back and forth banter from both fighters, as both of them had no shortage of things to say about the other the last few years. It would be quite the event, although how much credit the victor would be given depends on who the victor is. For Wilder, it'd certainly be a chance for him to get back in the winner's bracket. But for Dillian, well, how much credit would Dillian Whyte get for beating Deontay Wilder in this scenario? Remember what the scenario is.
Fury beats him in a third fight.
It's basically saying that leading up to this fight, what would be the Dillian Whyte fight, Deontay Wilder would be coming off of back-to-back losses. 2 consecutive losses. If he lost to Whyte, that'd be the third.
How much credit are you supposed to give Dillian in that situation?
Don't get me wrong. Even in that situation, I think people would pay to see it, particularly in the United Kingdom. Dillian Whyte's supporters over there across the pond. As far as the finance of it, the fiscal element, would the event be a success? I definitely think it could. It's just that beyond that, in terms of legacy, how much credit would Dillian Whyte be given if he beat Wilder under those circumstances, where he'd be coming off of
2 losses,
2 demoralizing beatings?
Yeah, I don't know.
I have no aversion to this particular scenario. I just don't know how realistic it is. I mean, Wilder's ego has grown to proportions over the years to where it's hard to imagine him starting from scratch like this, having to fight in an eliminator.
Yeah.
To get into world title contention?
Would he really do that?
And would Dillian Whyte oblige him? Would he do for Deontay Wilder what Deontay Wilder would not do for him? Would he give him the shot that Wilder never gave him?
Yeah, I don't know.
That'd certainly be the ultimate fuck you from the WBC to Dillian Whyte. Him having sat there as long as he has in the number one spot, deprived of a world title opportunity, only for that same WBC to turn around and order him to defend his interim title against Deontay Wilder. The same Wilder who wouldn't give Dillian a shot willingly. Dillian who had to sit there and watch Tyson Fury fight Wilder 2 times. Ortiz, same thing. He fights Wilder 2 times. Brazil manages to get one in there so that same WBC could order Dillian to fight Deontay Wilder. And if he doesn't, what's the WBC do? Rescind his status as interim champion? That really would be the ultimate fuck you to Dillian Whyte. I'm telling you, this scenario, it has its virtues, it has its pros, but it also has its cons. Ultimately, I don't see this scenario as being very likely. That could all end up being much ado about nothing, as Wilder losing again to Tyson Fury could spell the end of Deontay Wilder as far as his boxing career.
He could very well retire.
Putting the kibosh on this scenario altogether. The good news is we're going to get to see how this plays out one way or another. And that's what I'm looking forward to the most. In other heavyweight news, per a tweet from Mike Kopinger 2 days ago, per his sources, Mike said Oscar Rivas versus Carlos Takam, what shaped up to be a good heavyweight slugfest, was set to headline ESPN on July 14th in Las Vegas. Now the fight is off because Rivas suffered a right elbow injury and requires arthroscopic surgery. His promoter, Yvonne Michel, tells The Athletic. 2 days later, we see Carlos Takam via Instagram posting the image of himself in heated combat against not Oscar Rivas, but Jarrell Miller. And this is what I always thought was going to happen. Not so much about Oscar Rivas' elbow injury. I didn't see that coming. But as far as Jarrell Miller's very next fight, coming against Carlos Takam, that fight being Jarrell Miller's top-ranked debut, that's what I was anticipating. That's what I always thought was going to happen.
Jarrell's in no position to turn it down.
Carlos Takam would be the most solid guy that Jarrell Miller has faced in the entirety of his professional boxing career, a career that started back in July of 2009. Ladies and gentlemen, that's only a year after Deontay Wilder debuted as a professional. That's how long Jarrell Miller's been floating around. Things should have got serious a long time ago for this guy, and in some ways they did with that Anthony Joshua situation, but we all know what happened there. Jarrell Miller fucked himself right out of that goddamn fight.
I know that's right.
Yeah, Top Rank signed a couple of heavyweights. Jarrell Miller among them, Carlos Takam, Agit Kabayel. Quite a few of these guys have yet to have made their top-ranked debuts.
Yeah.
And for Jarrell and Carlos, that's what this would be. Their top-ranked debut.
And it's about fucking time.
And provided that Jarrell Miller has been doing what he's supposed to be doing, staying in shape throughout this layoff, this global pandemic, provided that he's kept himself fit enough that should he get a phone call, he can oblige it, I see no reason that he shouldn't be able to stand in for Oscar Rivas and take over that fight date. I don't want to hear that it was short notice. I don't want to hear that this guy wasn't ready. I don't want to hear any gripes about the money, because Jarrell Miller is really in no position to haggle. He needs to get out there as soon as he can, because the last time this guy was in action was in November of 2018. It's been a full fucking year, well over a year, since this guy did anything in the squared circle. So if he's got his head on straight, he'll want to get in there as soon as possible.
With anybody.
And enough about the Eddie Hearn AJ shit. Enough about the pet scandal. You put it behind you, you move on. It's 2020. And if you got an opportunity to get a fight in before this year is out, you better fucking take it. Because the whole of 2019 was a fucking wash for you. You got absolutely nothing done last year. But you have the opportunity to put some work in this year to ensure that the year of 2020 isn't a wash in all the ways that 2019 was. I see no fucking reason that Jarrell Miller shouldn't be able to fill that slot, fill that spot, and finally make his top-ranked debut, which has been in the works for a while now. And finally, per a tweet from Steve Kim, here's what Emmanuel Navarrete said about Naoya Inoue. In reality, that's one of the fights that I think would keep me at 122. A fight like that, but it has to be soon. I cannot be waiting around to see if he's going to come up to 122 or not. And I'm not against Naoya Inoue fighting Emmanuel Navarrete. Why would I be? It's a great fight if and when Naoya Inoue moves up to 122, but as it stands, that's not going to happen anytime in the near future. The order of the day for Naoya Inoue is the Casimiro unification match, and thereafter, the next order of business would be to grab the last brass ring against the winner of Nonito Donaire versus Nordine Oubaali. Nordine Oubaali, who is the current reigning WBC champion at that weight. Why is Emmanuel Navarrete thinking about a guy whose itinerary is booked when there are two world champions right there in his own weight class to choose from?
Yeah.
Sounds a lot like Emmanuel Navarrete is contemplating a move upstairs to 126. He's pressed for time, and he wants to make something happen. He's had 5 defenses of that WBO Super Bantamweight title, and he's set to make a 6th later on this month against Uriel Perez. Emmanuel Navarrete is one of the bigger 122-pound fighters, one of the bigger 122-pound champions. Thus, a move upstairs to 126 is inexorable. But if you know you're on borrowed time and you're pressed to make something big happen, why are you looking at Naoya Inoue of all people? He's not talking about moving up anytime in the near future.
He's got enough work to do in his own weight class.
Before he decides to move up to 122, where you are, before he decides to move upstairs.
So what the hell are you looking at him for?
Perhaps it is the politics of boxing that have forced Emmanuel Navarrete to look downstairs where Naoya Inoue is, because he knows that one of the other world champions in his own division, Ray Vargas, he's on the PBC side of things, and we all know how the politics of boxing work by now. We all know that the people at Top Rank and the people at the PBC don't have the best working relationship. Thus, you can't really target that guy with any hopes of landing the fight.
Nah.
Even though you're in the same weight class. But there is still MJ Akhmadaliev, who is in possession of 2 of the 4 world titles in the Super Bantamweight division. And unlike Ray Vargas, you got a good chance of getting a fight with this guy.
At least better than your chances of landing a fight with Ray.
There is still time to orchestrate a unification match between Navarrete and Akhmadaliev. I don't see what politics, what political boundary lines, what severed ties or fractured relationships would prevent a fight like that happening. If you want to make something big happen before you leave 122, there's your shot.
There's your answer.
MJ ain't got a heck of a lot going on, and neither do you, aside from this Uriel Perez fight. But that fight, that's just a tune-up fight. That's just a keep busy fight. That's just to keep the tools sharp kind of fight. It's not a big event by any stretch of the imagination. So once you get past that, why don't you start pushing for that MJ fight?
These guys need each other.
The guys at the lighter weights, anything below 126. Those guys can't afford to stay away from each other. Those guys can't afford to operate independently of what other good fighters there are in the weight class. Maybe you can get away with that at 147, 154, 160. Those glamour weights. Maybe you can get away with that upstairs. But at 122, you're doing yourself a great disservice by not targeting those kinds of fighters as the smaller fighters. The guys at the lighter weights, they characteristically don't get the same attention that the welterweights, the middleweights, and the heavyweights do. The only way you're going to get any kind of attention for yourself in this division is to target the other champions like yourself. So when Emmanuel Navarrete says that he feels an Naoya Inoue fight is one of the few fights that could keep him in that division, if that's the only fight that he's looking at, if that's the only kind of fight and the only fighter that he's got his heart set on, he might as well move up to 126 now.
You ain't gonna get that fucking fight.
Not in the near future. I don't see a fight like that being feasible for another 2 to 3, maybe even 4 fights. Depends on whether or not Naoya Inoue makes it through that Casimiro fight and whether or not he decides to take some tune-up fights thereafter in preparation for what could be yet another unification match. Too many intangibles. Too much of that scenario is immaterial right now.
And between those unification fights, we could see Naoya Inoue taking up tune-up matches, 1 or 2. He's also going to be in possession of several world titles. Currently, he's in possession of 2, and for each one of those 2 world titles, he's going to have 2 mandatories. Could be 3 world titles, which makes it 3 mandatories. This guy's got a busy schedule.
Could be a year, 2, well over a year before he's ready to move up to another division, another weight class, so can't leave it up to him. He can't be the only reason you're still at 122. There's at least one world champion, one unified world champion in your division that you can target and the fight can be made. As I reiterate, those little guys at Super Bantamweight, they can't afford to stay away from each other.
You kidding me?
I'll tell you what you can do in the mean in-between time. In the mean in-between time, while you push, and push hard, to get that MJ Akhmadaliev fight before you leave 122, you shame Ray Vargas. That's right, you shame that guy.
You shame that guy into wanting to fight you. And even if he doesn't, you can still shame him for the fight not happening. You turn the heat up on that guy. You put the pressure on that guy. You start asking questions like, why doesn't he want to have an all-Mexican shootout the way that Eric Morales and Marco Antonio Barrera had an all-Mexican shootout years ago? Why doesn't he want that for his legacy? Because even if the fight doesn't happen, it makes you look good, and it makes him look bad.
It's good publicity.
Why doesn't he want to have an all-Mexican shootout the way that Carlos Cuadras and Juan Francisco Estrada had their all-Mexican shootout? Why doesn't Ray Vargas want that kind of a fight for himself and his legacy?
It's that guy's problem.
In between time, you get yourself that MJ fight. That's what you can do with the time you got left at 122.